Hi everyone, it's Sydney from Sydney. Today we're doing something a little bit different and special. We want to look at how we lead growth in the enterprise after a crisis. And to do that, I've invited Susann Clifton-Smith, the founder and managing director of Simply Progress, to join me in a fireside chat. Now, she actually got this right because she's actually literally next to her fireplace at home. Hi Susann, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Sydney. Thanks for having me. Really excited about the opportunity.
Awesome. So look, we're going to cover a few things here. I've made some notes. We're going to look at what's changed since COVID-19. We're going to look at the future of work. We'll talk about some growth strategies and what are some of the challenges. But before we dive into that, I'd love to get a little bit of a sense of your backstory. Susann, how did you get here?
Well, it's literally how did I get here to Australia? As you can probably hear from my accent. I'm originally from Germany, and I have since I left Germany when I was 19. I've traveled the world. I've worked quite internationally. I've worked in France. I've worked in New Zealand. I've worked in Switzerland, and I'm now working in Australia. So I've been here for more than 10 years now. So this is really well and truly my home. But as we're going to talk about soon, the business has a lot to do actually with my roots, with my German roots. I was crazy enough to really pursue a career in research originally. So I've done a PhD at Macquarie University in Sydney, and then worked for a number of large and smaller enterprises to really immerse myself into these organizations and understand how they operate, how they work, what they do well, what they don't do well, and how research can actually inform all of this. So on that journey, I've worked for pretty much anything from media companies to digital transformation companies. I've worked in Telstra, for example, as well. I did a lot of consulting work for Telstra. I've worked with some of the major banks along the way. So it's been a really, really interesting mix for me. And I like to keep it interesting.
And it's always been around design for enabling organizations to grow. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I think initially my research background didn't necessarily focus on that. My background is really about understanding humans and human behavior.
Okay.
But then as I sort of moved into the industries, because I really wanted to support businesses to make really well-informed decisions with research, I naturally sort of felt myself gravitating towards creating growth strategies. So I've been doing this quite naturally in every role that I've held so far. And that's sort of what I stuck with. I thought I'm really passionate about the future, about change, about what we need to do to move forward, to thrive. So that's what pretty much I'm about. Awesome.
So speaking about being crazy enough, for 20 plus years, I've been crazy enough to be an entrepreneur. So always taking risk, but always passionate about the opportunity and the impact that you can create. So about a year ago, you decided to go down this path. And in 2019, you founded Simply Progress. And I love the name, by the way. So simple and also catchy. Tell me about that. Why did you start that business?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Sydney. I guess my nature is I tend to take some risks, and I like to say them, they're well-informed risks. And so one of the passions I've always had in the back of my mind is I wanted to use my experience, I wanted to use my skill set to actually really just purely focus to help organizations grow in areas that they may not necessarily have on their agenda at the moment, or that they may not be able to pursue in their current environment. Particularly for the big enterprises, they may not always be in that position to, put big teams together and looking at different growth strategies or ways of how they can differentiate. So for me, that was really a passion that drove me. And I thought the best way to realize that passion was actually to create the company. And the other reason for starting the company really was my passion for prioritization. So as a consultancy, that's reasonably rare in the sense that most consultancies, they love to create the plans, they want to execute the plans, and they tend to take that back into their organization to deliver that back to the business. what I really wanted to focus on is actually helping the businesses, my business clients, to have the information and all the insights to create and execute on the strategies themselves if they want to. So we basically accompany our businesses as far or as little as they want us to. So we are basically part of their journey. And that's the real key. So we don't keep any IP. The IP is always with our clients.
That's awesome. And then we're going to talk about sort of growth and change and innovation and so on. And a lot of large organizations, they talk about agility and they talk about pivoting and they talk about adapting, but it's hard. Like, it's hard being a small organization trying to do that. Imagine being a large organization. And I think it's been proven many times over that this model of innovating from the edge, where you partner with organizations that specialize in one or more areas for that sort of niche, is the best way to go. So congratulations on launching this business. And I'm excited for you. I think you're going to do some great things here.
At a crazy time, right? As well. It's a crazy time.
like anyone knew this was happening, right? No one could have predicted. I think it's caught everyone by surprise.
Yeah.
So really good segue, I guess, in terms of crazy times. What's some of the changes that you're seeing, given what's happened with COVID, in terms of how people are working, how people are leading, how people are managing and responding? What's been your little sort of view?
Well, I guess the thing that almost surprised me the most was the speed up front, the speed that at which this virus sort of took the whole world into a very, out of its normal spin almost. And as I said before, researched my background. So actually, I started looking into COVID-19 since December. So way, way, way before it was actually publicly being talked about in Australia. So you would think that I had almost my finger on the pulse at that time, as I came across this thing and started to go, it's not too much talk about this, but obviously, if China talks about it, normally it means there's really something going on, because they're not necessarily that forthcoming straight away with those sort of things.
Yes.
And yet it hit us by surprise. It hit everybody else by surprise. And I almost felt like there was this instant stop to a lot of things what people were doing, like literally people being asked to stay at home, wanting to stay at home, public transport being affected massively, almost overnight. People stopped traveling, international travel that was put on a hold. I remember the conversation early on when the Prime Minister came out and said, we basically can't stop international travel, that would be a disaster. And it happened within almost only a few days. He turned around very quickly and realized just the danger that we were in Australia, and that was something that had to be done. So that obviously took the whole aviation industry off its track, transport industry off its track, retail completely off its track, because people, particularly in Sydney, a lot of people doing shopping on the way, getting things in the city. So all of a sudden we found the entire city hub almost dead overnight. So some scary things that were happening. And I use that word quite strongly because I do feel that about the first 4 weeks, I'd say were almost as a blur to a lot of people. So we're talking about, working from home and so on. And it really wasn't by design. People kind of stumbled into this and had to adapt really, really quickly. But that's the amazing thing about humans and people. They do tend to adapt reasonably quickly. And so we did. So people had never worked from home. All of a sudden, we're working from home. I observed some really interesting things happening to my husband's business, where they were actually delivering chairs to people's homes, so they would have the right ergonomic setup at home. We noticed that office work, so we're doing obviously a fantastic business at the time with getting stands and TVs and monitors. So there's a real divide. Also, if you summarize, there's a real divide between businesses that came to stand still almost overnight, and other businesses that were so busy, frantically busy, that they were really struggling to keep up, including the Woolies and the likes. So really, really interesting debate, and that's something that we're obviously not used to. Particularly, what would make me realize is just what it takes to keep an economy in balance. So we're still in that moment, but I think we're now on a different trajectory, and hopefully on the way up.
Yeah, it feels like we're coming out of it, but you're right. I mean, in terms of the speed of what happened and the way everyone had to adapt, and I love that. Like as an entrepreneur, like often you've got ideas or you can see things, but there is no tipping point. There's no forcing mechanism, right, for you to implement those things, because people and organizations and companies and economies and governments are what I call fat and comfortable. Everything's fine. In Australia for many years we benefited from the mining and resources boom. So when you walk into an organization and talk about innovation and you talk about change, you talk about tech startups, and it's like, yeah, sounds cool, but I don't actually have to do anything because everything's fine. Whereas this really created a forcing mechanism to, seriously, 12 months ago, I would have had to explain to people or spell out what Zoom was for people, right? Whereas now people have Zoom fatigue.
It's a verb. It's
Zoom. Exactly. Let's Zoom.
We're doing
So really fascinating. And I've had the blessing of seeing it from multiple sort of angles, having 3 kids and the way they've had to adapt for homeschooling and missing their friends. And my youngest son does development squad, soccer, football. So we've had the laptop set up outside while his coach is coaching him via Zoom, all the way to my 70-year-old parents who are still working, and mum works for the health department, and she's set up at home, and and she's like, right, I'm using Skype for business, Sydney. Am I doing this right? So it's been interesting. So from your research perspective on human behavior, I'm wondering what kind of sort of learnings and insights will come out of this, given we've had to watch humans, adapt. And I think there's been an impact on mental health, definitely, both because of people have lost jobs, lost businesses, and the isolation as well from one another. That's been also interesting.
Yeah, I think so as well. I've given a couple of talks about where I actually compared this event to what normally would be described in the health sector as trauma. And now we don't want to make this all doom and gloom, but really I think the last little while that we saw was that really that heavy onset, something's happened, something's hit you, stops you, and quite a large percentage, I'd say, of the population was almost hit in a traumatic way. A lot of people lost their savings. We're talking over 50% of Australian households that were severely impacted in terms of their income. So that is scary. Again, I use that word, but it is really scary. Now, the reason I use that word, because there are different types of people that use that emotion in different ways. So there's some people that will really withdraw in their shell and they'll struggle for a while. And then there are other people, particularly in the entrepreneur section, they'll find something in them to use that emotion of instability, insecurity, actually looking for something else, something new, because they know they just can't stay in that same space anymore. It's just what it is. They need to look for new energy to do something different. And that's really the exciting thing for me. I think hopefully that's also going to be the exciting thing for our economy moving forward. Because I think actually, whilst we're talking about recovery now and everything else, I think we're probably, I'd assume, about 2 months away before we'll actually really see the blossoming of emerging companies, of emerging sectors. Some of them kind of, I would say, the patchwork businesses. So we've had a lot of retailers, and we've had quite a lot of food services, hospitality services that innovated overnight. So all of a sudden, a restaurant was starting to distribute all their groceries. Another restaurant that I've heard of, a very, very high-end restaurant, they were creating menus for home cooking, essentially, so that you could cook their amazing meals at home, and delivering the ingredients for that. So they almost become the fancy version of the U-Foods. So there's lots of these patchwork innovative ideas that came to the forefront, which is amazing. But I think we are yet to see some really, really amazing new areas in industries, in fact, that we just didn't need or didn't have before. So that's what I'm really, really excited about.
I'm with you on that. I think in terms of there's a lot of, while this was very tough on people, and people have died from that. Putting that aside, I think a lot of goodness has come out from it. I think people have also realized, the sort of opportunity to better integrate home and work life, and better, if you can put the worrying side aside, like I think there's been a lot of goodness that's come out of for people in terms of balancing time with family and time on their passion and as well as their profession. And then for the organization, there was no time to delay. So the people have had to innovate. Imagine, that quickly adaptability, because your revenue has literally just dried up overnight. You don't have a choice but to get a minimum viable or something of value of a product or service out and just get going with it, and not get too fancy and put your ego into check and just go, I've got to give this a go and run with that. So with that, I think let's talk a little bit about, what does now growth look like inside organizations, and what are some of the strategies? Because, it's the 21st of May that we're recording this recording. Starting next week, kids are starting at school. I'm imagining more people will be returning to offices or part-time, going back to the office. And I think there's a bit of pain still to come, but organizations are definitely thinking about, well, how do we, what now? How do we grow from here? So what are some of your insights on this? What does growth look like?
Well, I think at the moment it's the multi-million dollar question really for most people. And there's probably not a one-off recipe, but I'd like to describe it in three facets. So for me, growth and for Simply Progress, growth has really three facets. When we hear the word growth in the business environment, we love to think about exponential growth, particularly in entrepreneurs, right? That's what we're looking at. We're looking at that steep incline. That's great, and that's a fantastic outcome. That's ideally what we're striving for. But there are two other areas along the way of growth that I think are important. One is the journey of growth. The journey of growth usually has some ups and then some downs, some ups and some downs. And particularly now in this environment with COVID-19, I think that's just something we absolutely have to factor in, even as entrepreneurs. And there are some really good, I think, risk assessment strategies that go with those downs. And then there's the other part, which is equally important. And I think that's the foundation to growth. And as I said, we've had a number of businesses that their income was basically stopped overnight. The revenue dropped to zero. And then they had to innovate. Now they have to look at, do we want to continue in that space that we just started off in? And obviously we are on exponential growth there, potentially. We have some ups and downs. But what's basically the foundation that I have to now create to permanently potentially do this? And is that then still viable if I continue on that path? And likewise also, if I don't get that growth that I was hoping for, what's the type of foundation I can use that I already have in my business, or that I can create with little, as minimum investment as possible, to innovate and to create other ideas, or to connect with businesses and create that community to grow in the short and in the long term. So it depends really for me at the moment with who I'm working with in terms of our client base. It seems like really we have all three facets at the moment covered, but really I think the majority of businesses are at the point of they need to look at their foundations, or they need to look at that exponential growth and how I continue on that trajectory. Do I want to continue doing that long term? But I think still, likewise, that focus in the middle is important for both type of sectors that we're looking at. And that kind of, I think what it does is when we are considering that there will be blips, there have to be blips, given this thing is going to be around for a while, given that there will be a lot of changes happening globally in terms of the economy, potentially in terms of world powers, how they're working together or not working together. That will all have some direct or indirect effects on our own businesses. So it's really important then not to worry about that. The worry doesn't really help. But what we can do is look at some of us, okay, do we have any strategies in place when that does pan out? So we still have our foundation, and or we can also continue on that trajectory of growth. So these two, for me, they always go hand in hand together. So it's a pretty broad question at the moment. if we put this, I think, in terms of industries or areas that I maybe specifically see at the moment, I mean, obviously there are the two top ones that everybody's talking about, the Maslow pyramid. If you are in the food service industry, you're doing really well. Obviously, we know that. That's not really a surprise. And the pharma industry is another one, also fulfills a really, really primary need at the moment. That's our health. So we'll see, we have really seen growth in these areas, and we'll continue to see more growth. But there are sub areas where I could potentially imagine new things coming up. So for example, in the pharma industry, what we haven't really been able to tackle well yet is the end-to-end service of patient consultation, receiving medical goods, and receiving the medical treatment, and being looked after, being cared for as well, and doing that digitally. That hasn't really been done at that scale in the digital space. So I've started to see a number of pop-up players, a lot of pop-up entrepreneurs globally. In Germany, particularly, I've seen a few that want to tackle that. So I can see a lot more coming in those spaces. And I think even for the hospitality industry, I think there are some interesting avenues coming up too, as more households are going to go back to work, that have more money to spend again. So I can certainly see that there are some avenues for the hospitality industry as well, but they're obviously still more impacted, way more impacted than the other industries are. That's just the reality, I think. So in terms of the scale, the types, particularly for Australia, the amount of jobs that we generated over the last 20 years that were predominantly in the hospitality sector, I don't see us regaining those at a fast speed. I can't see that happening. So we will have to, and I think we can, leverage the skill sets we've got in those areas for other industries as well. So a lot of, I think, growth will come from people that are upskilling. We're already seeing that. Education sectors have shifted completely in terms of some of the offerings that they have got. They had to completely move basically all their training programs online. It's caused them a lot of pain, but I do also see long term, it's a good way for the education sectors to move forward and to stabilize those and find new growth areas at basically international level. Now that teaching is online, teaching is global. It has its limits, but there are certainly areas, I think, where we, as Australia, could tap into other nations online through education. And again, this is our second strongest GDP driver, is education. So I think there's definitely heaps of skill set in there that we can continue to leverage.
Cool. I've got a couple of questions to dig a little bit deeper on some of the stuff you said.
Yeah.
Awesome insights there. So let's leave exponential growth to the side for a moment, because if it's working for you, great, right? So you're just adding more fuel to the fire and you're optimizing for that. I think where most leaders are sort of scratching their heads right now will be, how do I go and address what you call the foundations, right? Like what's shifted? It's been massive disruption. And then the second thing that you're introducing here, which is awesome, which is about there's a journey to go, right? And in that journey, there'll be ups and downs, and you have to assess for the risks. And I guess, some of the work that I do around resilience and adaptability comes in, right? Yes. How do we build resilient leaders and adaptable people to changing context? Because these are the knowns, right? People change, context changes, and that's it. So if you're a leader in an organization right now and you're thinking about these foundations, what time horizon do you recommend that they look at when they're doing some of their ideation or strategic planning, and maybe they're getting you in to assist, or maybe they're not, but if they're thinking about this, what kind of time horizon? Because it feels like this thing's not over yet, like in terms of we've definitely had a big shakeup. But there's probably going to be some more aftershocks that come, right? Because of, for a while, the governments are chipping in to keep people employed, but that's going to run out in June. Then a lot of people are going to have to face the music and go, can I still keep these people? Or does, in Australia, let's say the JobKeeper payments stop and, can I afford to keep these people anymore? Or not everyone's returning back to the offices. So the, people in office space rental, their business has been impacted and so on, all the knock-on effects. So my point is, what's the time horizon and what kind of pain should they be planning for in that period of the journey, to sort of help prepare some of this stuff?
Both good questions. In terms of time, so when we did our planning, I guess just to give you a personal example, when we did the planning for our business back in February, when this thing really started to emerge, and I was sort of roughly foreshadowing by March that we were really going to see the onset here in Australia. We had a meeting, and I said, I think based on how the ripple effects were going at that point, how people behave in Australia, I thought, okay, probably by June, July, we should basically prepare. So for me, always, it's not waiting. Everybody was like waiting. We at home, when can we go back? But I'm sure most of my, industry partners would probably be the same. You do all the prep work beforehand, so you don't wait until things lift and restrictions are being lifted. You prepare well before restrictions are being lifted. Now, but the thing that, and I still think we are in that time trajectory almost. So for the first wave, so as I said, we're opening up now. It's already happening. We're a little bit faster than we anticipated. But I think by June, July, we'll certainly see a lot of movement, positive movement, I think. That will take, hopefully, will take away some of the negative sentiment that we're seeing, particularly in the media at the moment. Now, the next time wave depends a little bit, again, on how we are moving about, like physically moving out and about, and how we're able to stick with the social distancing rules, really, and how severe maybe a second wave could be. I can certainly envisage a second wave, but what I could imagine there is that we may not need to and cannot afford to really lock down again the country as rigidly as we have before. Yes. So to a degree, I think we're no longer talking about this is a one-off and then you have the restrictions in place and then we're going to move forward as we thought originally. It's going to be, this is part of us. This is part of, could be part of a year, could be part of a 2-year journey.
The new normal. It's the new normal.
The new normal. They call it the new normal, but and I don't think a lot of people will like this because you don't want to have a virus around, from a health perspective, it's not really nice. But it is to a degree normal. So I think what we will see is incisions, government incisions here and there.
Yep.
So what that means, incisions means that you'll have more blips. So you'll probably have to react and respond to changes and restrictions as a business a lot quicker.
Yes.
So that's the thing. We think so far it's been very fast of how this thing's hit us. Now I think in the next wave, we are going to see just how fast businesses will have to continuously adapt. So it's not so much the time of when businesses are opening back up for me. It's about the time frame that people can actually adjust to being able to continuously adjust going forward.
Yes.
So that's I like to use that elastic band analogy quite a bit, because I think this is it. So far, we didn't need to do that as a country. I think Australia has been one of those lucky countries where we have had very, very few strong shocks, economic shocks, health shocks, or social shocks like wars and so on. So in terms of resilience, we've just not had to face something like this almost ever before.
Yes.
I'd say maybe the best it comes closest to is maybe the Spanish flu. But even if you look at from a war perspective, Australia, thank goodness, hasn't had that here. Meaning in terms of having to work completely a way back up from scratch, from nothing. We've not had to do this. So that means in terms of resilience, we are maybe not quite as prepared as some other nations are. But what we do have is, I think in Australia, we do have tends to be positive sentiments that she'll be all right, mate. I think is a really important culture theme right now. I think it will actually really help us. It can really, really help us. So instead of withdrawing in that fear and going, oh my God, that we're going to be more aftershocks, like, oh yeah, it's okay. I can still go outside. I can still do things. So people start sort of coming back out of their houses and so on. So I think that's a cultural theme that's going to be that can carry us moving forward. Mm-hmm. But it will require two things. To sum this up from my perspective, it's going to require to become more flexible, really more agile, And it will also mean that we'll potentially have to bond with each other as businesses more. And this is something almost I'd like to see a little bit more, particularly with entrepreneur businesses. We have them together. We have communities, but I think we could leverage those communities more strongly to actually move us together, propose forward together. So to create basically business environments that can adapt to these shocks in a better way. So I think there could be some interesting synergies and combinations of businesses that we would have not seen otherwise. So that's why I've got some hopes, but I think that's also almost a need for us to fill some of the gaps that we will be getting sooner or later with unemployment rates. We'll have to find other ways to find opportunities for our workforce.
Got it. Yes. I think, so from an entrepreneur's perspective, and given that I coach a bunch of founders and businesses that try to sell into enterprise or partner with enterprise, the intention is always there, right? Because the young entrepreneurs, and I say young meaning young in company, I'm an old man startup guy, they've usually got things that are truly innovative and can help the organization, but there's too much, it's too difficult within the organization to take these things and run with it. So it's always been, yes, we'll invite you to a pitch competition, or we'll fund something, or, and then I've been speaking often around innovation. I'm saying innovation isn't red bean bags and jeans on Fridays. That's not innovation, right? If you're trying to create an agile and innovative startup or an environment where people and your business will benefit from change and innovation, then you really have to think about the entire supply chain of taking the concept with the people and going. And what I love about what you're saying is that this is another forcing mechanism for that collaboration, where you go, well, can't quite justify, and I've got too much already going on to start something necessarily new. So in that period that you're talking about, the foundations and the time frame, we have to be more agile. We have to be more quick. That's a forcing mechanism to create better partnerships. But these aren't partnerships that I've got you on my website and you're on, and I'm on your website, and we pat each other on the back and we feel good about it. But actually, we're trying to deliver value for our end target audience by joining forces and putting our efforts together and putting our products and services and initiatives together. So I like what you're saying there.
Yeah. And for me, I think the other interesting thing around this collaboration piece is leveraging diversity of thought, right? It's almost an overused term, and I know, a lot of enterprises, everybody talks about diversity of thought, but then when it comes to practice, nobody knows how to do this. But here, and this is a practical example right now, where, to your point, where you might have experts that can help you create the flexibility in your IT systems, and for example, setting up for cybercrime, protecting you from cybercrime, with somebody who might run a medical practice from home, or who might want to deliver prescriptions to home, or whatever it is going to be. So people would normally not really have much to do with each other, and they might have best sort of leverage or buy a service from one another, but not come together as a business to create a new end-to-end service. So it's going to create, for you, as I think in being in that leadership space, I think that there's some really interesting things you might want to coach us on down the track, because obviously to bring also this diverse thinking together creates some interesting conflicts occasionally, or misunderstandings, and we'll have to work through those as well, and we'll have to work through them at speed. So, and you talk about entrepreneurship a lot, right? And when we are going into, you've got an idea, or you've done some research, you understand a particular customer insight, you're creating an idea around a prototype, and then you get to the test and learn phase. Now, when I work with clients, most of my clients, they want to skip that. Huh? It's like when you get to the point, you have the idea, you just want to do it, and you want to stick with that. Ideally, you don't want to test and learn. People say test and learn very often, but that's not really what we mean. But now, I think we're going to be doing test and learn, test and learn, test and learn, test and learn. It's just going to become part of our DNA. And over time, I'm hopeful, and I think it becomes more natural. It's less of this, oh, this didn't work. Oh, no, I've made a mistake. It's going to become a lot less about it. It's going to become about, cool, but I learned something and I can now do this. And that's where I'm hoping that we will go. And I think people will naturally more inclined to think that the glass is half full. They'll probably excel in those environments really, really well.
Awesome. Um, Excellent. So what are some of the challenges now facing leaders as they now try to emerge from this, in your view, just purely from the leadership perspective? Like, what are some of the challenges, given that everything's been disrupted? Like, people are working remotely, everyone's got Zoom fatigue, you've got people feeling isolated, therefore mental and emotional states not in place. So what are some of the challenges that you're seeing that leaders have to face, not from bringing about just the technology or the business change, but on the people side of things?
Yeah, again, even as a leader, if you have the utmost confidence and you're a very solid leader, that doesn't mean your workforce thinks the same. So we're still going to continue to deal with a lot of uncertainty and insecurity and fear. And I think I would suggest the important thing is to recognize those things. So rather than saying, oh, it's going to be all great and don't worry about this, to really acknowledge when you are sensing or you are seeing that your colleagues or your teams are worried and are afraid, or are going through a traumatic experience because somebody might have been affected health-wise by this, to actually acknowledge this very, very quickly and respond to that and make that a thing rather than the thing to step over. So it's just like the test and learn thing. It's something, if you incorporate the feedback and that chat and that conversation about those concerns ongoingly, I think you can overcome them quicker. You can work through them quicker.
Yep.
Obviously, that helps. I think humans love to connect, to bond, and you're absolutely right. It's a real challenge in terms of doing that via Zoom. As awesome as this is, having this connectivity that way. One thing I've personally started to do, and that we've started to see success in it. We've been working with basically we've moved all of our conversation online, like literally conversations. So instead of waiting for the Zoom call to happen, because otherwise we spend all day on Zoom calls, we basically have put all of our projects, things into channels, online channels, and we're literally having conversations just like on SMS Messenger there. But the beauty of that thing is not only can you exchange thoughts and concerns or emojis there, but it's also actually a really practical tool for business because it's actually searchable. You've got almost like a database that we are creating at the same time about this particular project. So it has also a really good project management aspect to it as well, but it helps with that connectivity. And it certainly helps me to also, again, recognize if there is any concerns or confusions happening there. And the second it does, then we pick up the phone and we talk to each other, or we go on a conference call or something, to just nip that right at its core. That's something that I'd say maybe from a leadership perspective is one thing. There's heaps more.
Yeah, of course there is. That's awesome.
Right. So this is just a cultural one.
Yeah. So keeping aware of time, is there anything that I should have asked that I haven't, Susann?
I feel like you've been sort of prodding and probing into lots and lots and lots of really
we could keep going for hours. So very good. Yeah. So what's a good way people can connect with you or follow up if they're watching this video? How can they connect with you, and what should they do next?
Yeah, well, we have our presence on simplyprogress.com on our website. So we always have an events page up there. We're still hosting events, and we're doing a mixture of things there. So we're not over Zooming it. So lots of different things for content sharing as well. And then we also offer, and we will continue to offer free consulting sessions. So particularly if you're a startup, somebody who wants to get some directions, bounce some ideas, that's exactly the time to do this now or moving forward. So you can reach out to us either to my email, Susann, SUSANN, @simplyprogress.com. Or again, you can do that on the website and simply just book a session with us, and we can chat anytime.
Brilliant. So look, I think this has been a really insightful conversation. Obviously, you've got a wealth of experience and as importantly, a lot of passion and commitment for what you're doing. So thanks for sharing. So look, just to sum up, I think what I learned from this session is it's important to recognize that this has been like a traumatic shock, right? So, and to sort of recognize it that way as leaders, as we go about now building from here, it's important to stop for a moment and recognize. In terms of where to go from here and where the growth strategies are, you spoke about three things. You said there's the exponential growth, and if you've got a winner, great, keep pouring fuel on that. But if you have been disrupted and changed, it's time to go back and look at the fundamentals of what your growth is going to look like, and keep in mind that between resetting the fundamentals and the exponential growth, there's going to be a journey in between with lots of ups and downs. Prepare for risk, prepare for shocks. And you didn't use this word, but as you were speaking, I was thinking detachment from the end result, meaning, we just have to experiment, test, and then iterate again and keep going in that direction. Now, to do that quickly, you also shared the insight, and we spoke a little bit about it's about collaboration, and potentially finally this, startup and large enterprise partnership model might emerge because we don't have a choice, right? And it's really a good opportunity for the startup people listening to this. Think about that angle, how you can help organizations innovate from the edge with a low cost, low risk model, because you've got something that's already been proven in a small niche way. And finally, we said, there's going to be many leadership challenges, but one of the biggest and most important ones is how our team is feeling. And if, as leaders, we have to be empathetic and keep our eyes open. And if it's a thing, make it a thing rather than stepping over the thing, right? So I love that, and I'm going to quote you on that. So that's it. So I think we've had a good chat, and hopefully some good value for the people listening and watching this. And go check out simplyprogress.com. Explore what you can in terms of their upcoming events, or take up Susann for a complimentary consultation. And in terms of connecting with her on LinkedIn, you can be found on LinkedIn. People can reach out. And if you're following what I'm doing, it's, check out impactladder.com and connect with me on LinkedIn, or follow my YouTube page. So anyway, so everyone, thanks for watching and listening. And Susann, thank you for joining me and your insights, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks again, Sidney. You've demonstrated again what a wonderful expert you are in the whole leadership space as well. So we really enjoyed working with you and learning from you as well. So continue on this journey together.
Perfect. See you soon.